I'm Kelly Wong. I'm CEO of Elucid, and we're a Boston-based AI medtech company that's dedicated to putting AI software on top of cardiac CT scans to help doctors understand both flow blockage and plaque composition, ultimately risk of heart attack and stroke. We see a vision of giving doctors the ability to have a precision-guided diagnosis and treatment pathway. Elucid was founded on that premise that still vexes cardiologists today. Still, after all these innovations in drugs and therapeutics, the number one killer, 18.5 million people die every year from heart attack and stroke. And 80% of those are preventable, according to the World Health Organization. So there's a big gap. Like, why aren't we preventing it? So the founders had the concept of this idea of treating people with symptoms and risk factors is insufficient. We really need to go deeper. We need to look actually in the plaque that's building up in the arteries, and not just the anatomy of the plaque, but also the composition of the plaque. What's the calcified component, non-calcified, and more importantly, is there inflammation going on the lipid-rich necrotic core that tends to kill cells and ultimately will grow enough to cause a heart attack and stroke? In order to go deeper, the founders had this concept of not only looking at the plaque anatomy, but also looking at the composition from a basic fundamental histological point of view. So they had patients with CT scans, those vessels were harvested, they were sectioned by a world-renowned pathologist and stained, and they had CT slice meet pathology slice over and over again. So the algorithm could develop what we call CT virtual histology that now allows doctors to see what they can't see with their regular eyes, calcified components, non-calcified components, and what they really can't see, which is the lipid-rich necrotic core, that inflammatory part, that if it grows, it becomes the problem that causes heart attack and stroke. Cardiovascular disease remains the number one killer. We talked about 18.5 million lives globally every year lost because of cardiovascular disease. In the United States alone, there's 1.6 million heart attacks and strokes a year, and it's a very prevalent disease. 20% of people over the age of 20 have that, so 1 in 5 people over 20, which is remarkable. And what's even more staggering, it gets worse as you get older. Between 45 and 85, half of Americans have cardiovascular disease, and many of those folks don't even know it. Elucid is looking at the evolution of diagnostics overall. The idea that heart attacks and strokes can be prevented has been known to doctors in the past. And so we've seen cardiovascular diagnosis go from send everybody to the cath lab, which was ineffective, to now let's do nuclear testing on people to look at nuclear perfusion, structural areas of the heart, an indirect measure of coronary artery disease. The problem there is 55% of people go home with nothing wrong. They miss 30% of coronary vascular disease or coronary artery disease because you're only looking at a moment in time. You're not being able to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So the world, that 20 billion nuclear market is shifting to coronary CT because there you can actually look at the plaque buildup in the arteries. So we see ourselves being able to amplify the market, have that conversion happen quicker because we're going to add value with not just the anatomy of the plaque, but what the composition of the plaque is and give the doctor an ability to measure flow rate in a non-invasive way. One of the reasons why there's this big gap of so many heart attacks that are preventable is that the standard of care is inefficient and ineffective. The legacy treatment pathway is you would get a treadmill stress test, you get a nuclear stress test, and the problem there was they sent 55% of people to the cath lab that went home fine. They didn't need to have any intervention done. And moreover, 30% of cardiovascular disease goes undetected. So not a great method. What we're doing is taking a CT scan and adding especially the flow result that we're putting on top of that. And what's been shown in research, if you take a cardiac CT scan and add the FFR value, actually 80% of the people that you send to the cath lab go on to do a procedure like PCI, stenting, or revascularization. And you'll find that actually there's 70% people that need, more people that need revascularization when they find this treatment pathway. So you're treating more people that need to be treated, and you're not spending the time and money wasted on people that are perfectly healthy. I'll go into how the device was developed. We talked a little bit about this already, where patients had a CT scan, vessels are harvested, those vessels were sectioned by a pathologist and stained, and we had the CT scan meet the histology pathology slice over and over again. And that created CT virtual histology. So we can give doctors calcified, non-calcified components in a quantitative manner, and we can even give them the lipid-rich necrotic core. In fact, we're the only non-invasive measure of this lipid-rich necrotic core. So the doctors now use that product to understand how they should think about your drug therapy. If a patient comes in and they see stable plaque, that patient will probably get just a middle-of-the-road statin. If the patient comes in and they see high lipid-rich necrotic core, you're talking about aggressive statin therapy, anti-inflammatory therapy, and probably dual platelet therapy on top of that. So drug management is becoming, that's the first step to personalized precision drug recommendations. And then the next step that we are developing is a flow-based product. We're taking the plaque and we're feeding an AI model so that the AI can figure out what the flow is in the vessel based upon the plaque composition. The fact that someone with a lipid-rich necrotic core has a very hard ability for that vessel to dilate, that very much affects the flow. So we've developed what we believe is the best, most accurate model to predict FFR in a non-invasive way. And a doctor is going to use that to make a decision of whether you have significant flow blockage. And if you do, they're going to send you to the cath lab to get a more invasive procedure like a coronary angiography. So how the Elucid method is better than the legacy treatment pathway is their research has shown when you add an FFR analysis on top of a CT scan, actually 80% of the people you send to the cath lab are necessary to go down the line of getting PCI, so a stent or some sort of revascularization, as opposed to in the past 45%. So you're capturing more patients. Also, you're seeing 70% more necessary revascularizations. In the past, you saw 30% of undetected disease. You're detecting more disease in this pathway. So we believe, and we can show that it's a better method than the legacy treatment pathway. And there are a few companies that add on to CT scans. We believe our method is differentiated. It's better in that it's based on histology, which is objective and quantifiable. As most people know, a pathologist does a section on a slide, they stain it, and calcified is going to stain differently than non-calcified, going to stain differently than the lipid-rich necrotic core. That allows us to measure it, quantify it, and allows us to teach the algorithm how to see what the radiologist cannot see, especially that lipid-rich necrotic core. Other companies try to solve this with looking at visual expert assessment, which there's variability between experts. There's also variability if you give the same expert the same image a couple weeks later, and you're inherently not going to get an algorithm that's any better than your ground truth. So our ground truth being in histology, being objective and quantifiable. Others have ground truth that is more subjective and visually assessed. And moreover, since visual assessment can't be done for lipid-rich necrotic core, they just make a technical definition like low attenuation plaque or low density non-calcified plaque, which is technically what it is. It captures lipid-rich necrotic core, but other features live in that range of Hounsfield units or the grayscale of what they see on a CT scan. I liken it to trying to stop guns at the airport with a metal detector. It's better than nothing. You know, you'll stop the guns, but more often than not, you'll pick up bracelets, wristwatches, and belt buckles that have no threat. And it's a similar thing with plaque. We have the gun detector because we can tell you exactly the lipid-rich necrotic core. And when the consequence of getting a non-threatening signal means you have to go to an invasive procedure, you'd much rather have the gun detector. The potential market opportunity is the biggest category that we've seen in healthcare and med tech. We see a $38 billion TAM across the world, and in the US market, it's growing 50 to 60%. A lot of that growth is due to the shift from nuclear cardiology, that 20 billion shift in CT scans, and it's also helped tremendously by tailwinds. The government reimbursement on CCTA, cardiac CT scans, has been doubled. And then in 2024, we saw the Flow add-on with FFR at $1,000 reimbursement, pretty much universally covered, had a category 1. And what was surprising for the industry and a great thing for patients is that just over Thanksgiving, 70% of Medicare eligible got covered for the plaque product. The AMA is making that a category 1 in just 1 year in January 2026, which opens the door to universal coverage. And we see a payment rate on that between $1,000 and $1,500. So it's not being incented for the doctor to do the right thing for the patient, and the economics of the system all working out in favor of what's best for the patient. It's an exciting time for Elucid. We recently got FDA clearance on our plaque product. We call it Plaque IQ, and we're just going into a limited market release with a handful of customers to deliver plaque in a commercial way where they're making real clinical decisions for their patients. And we're going to take those and we're going to build a model home. We're going to show other physicians how to do it right. What we're doing in addition to that is we're also developing the algorithm for that flow product, the FFR product. We look to submit that to the FDA in the second half of 2025, and then we'll have what we believe will be the best plaque product, the best flow product in one, and we'll go full commercial after that. So the future developments are the commitment to really clinical trials and a clinical strategy that advance patient care. We already spoke about the fact that we're developing what we believe is going to be the best in class, most accurate flow product for the second half of 2025. We also announced a registry where we're collecting data on people that had a CT scan, had a heart attack in 3 years and matching the people that had a CT scan and didn't have a heart attack in 3 years. And we're gonna allow our AI to figure out what about the physiology, the anatomy, as well as the plaque composition is able to predict and risk stratify someone to look at plaque and understand what the time to a heart attack would be for them versus maybe what a time to stabilize with drug treatment would be for them. So that's gonna be a big improvement to our way we personalize precision diagnostics and precision treatment by understanding plaque composition, drug therapy, and be very patient specific so that time to stabilization is much sooner than the time for them to have a heart attack. Not only are we looking at precision guided, personalized drug treatment, precision guided interventions in the cath lab, we're also looking at a future of where this will become like a mammogram or a colonoscopy. Everybody over 45, we talked about how in the USA, 50% of people over 45 have cardiovascular disease, and many of them don't know that. Well, screening is the answer to that, and we see a future where everybody should just get a plaque analysis and understand how they should continue a healthy lifestyle or take a certain regimen of specific drugs to help manage that so that they never have to worry about a heart attack or stroke. Again, that gap of 18.5 million people dying every year and 89% of those preventable, we think better diagnostics and better personalized treatment or precision guided diagnostics and treatment is going to be key to make a world where we can prevent those heart attacks and strokes. A lot of us working at the company also have a personal connection to this. I certainly do. My father passed away at 52 from a heart attack and stroke. He could have definitely used this technology. When I look at myself, I'm well over 52. Every time I had a pain in my chest, I always wondered, is it happening? And I had my Elucid done last year, and luckily the doctor said, there's no lipid-rich necrotic core, your flow is fine, no stenosis over 20%. With the drug therapy we have you on, LDL under 70, you will never die of a heart attack. And that's an amazing thing for me to, priceless, a weight off my shoulder. In terms of important milestones, there have already been some amazing ones, both inside and outside of the company. Externally, the idea of seeing FFR go to universal coverage, the idea of plaque now being covered and becoming a category 1 in just 1 year in January 2026 is amazing. And internally in the company, we've had a great success of hiring phenomenal commercial people as we start going into the commercial airspace. So a wonderful team. And then we have, again, this scientific bent of going for, personalized treatment, risk stratification, and eventually helping this become a standard screening tool to help not just Americans, but the entire world. In the next year or two, I'm really looking for the commercial traction to hear those patient stories like mine of people that, had their heart attack saved or had their mind cleared because they had a family history and they don't have to worry about it because they have the right drug therapy to manage their indication. It's going to be an exciting time to see patients affected. And then we have all these new features and products that we have in the pipeline that's going to help think about stroke, going to help think about other areas of cardiovascular disease. And it's just going to be a super exciting time over the next couple of years for Elucid.